Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Lawcast. We're officially on the road to WrestleMania, and I am so excited to start the WrestleMania anthology. It's the one that started them all. It's WrestleMania 1.
I cannot believe we're going on another ride that takes us all the way back into the middle of the goddamn 80s, where everything was terrible. We're back again.
This show does not hold up at all. It's for the era a perfectly fine show, but it shows how much better wrestling would get in the years to come.
The thing that shocked me the most about watching the show is I was kind of expecting it to be like a bad show compared to what we're normally used to. And honestly, like you said, I mean, it was about what you would expect. But it's the production value of the show that really blew me away, because this does not in any way seem like a WWE show even. It just looks dingy.
No, yeah. If you compared it to even the first Saturday night's main event, which was only a month or two after this, they had dramatically improved their production. And basically, the backstory there is they were going into business with NBC Sports with Dick Ebersol, who I think is one of the unsung heroes of the WWF national expansion. And they sent Ebersol the tape, or however you watched something in these days. They sent him. He watched WrestleMania 1. And he just called Vince and was like, we've got to do something about the production. Like, you can't put something like that on network TV. This is still them having what seemed like state-of-the-art production for wrestling at the time. But yeah, one tiny light above the ring, can't see the crowd, problems with the audio, interviews playing at the wrong time, just all sorts of things that they would very quickly correct.
Yeah, and it must be said, a lot of people don't really know, but Dick Ebersol, you said he was one of the great unsung heroes. He's one of the great unsung heroes of WWE in general. The entire industry would probably be different if it weren't not only just for the influence that he had on WrestleMania and helping to make it a success, but like the Saturday night's main events, they are still part of NBC to this day because of Dick Ebersol's impact.
And it's kind of off topic, but I'm stunned they don't actually, the way they use their NBC TV deal, that the only two NBC specials they actually produce are like, don't they do like a WrestleMania clip show each year in the tribute to the troops?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's insane. I don't understand how they're not doing how they're not doing proper Saturday night's main event specials.
Well, they did one in 2006? Because I remember
Edge did a couple, and they didn't draw very good ratings. But I think with the changing TV landscape, this is something that we're going to be reevaluating. In fact, we might be reevaluating because the rumor is Fox may want the TV rights, and they would put Raw on broadcast TV every Monday.
If Raw got on actual Fox every Monday, it wouldn't make any difference because I don't have cable. Like, this would be like the worst possible time to pursue broadcast TV as people frantically cut cable, but still, it's a big deal if that were to actually happen.
Well, there's this amazing hack where you get an antenna.
That's fair.
Up the broadcast channels for free. I don't know if you've heard about this.
I've honestly never thought about it because there's nothing on the broadcast channels that's worth watching until now.
Yeah. So basically the lead-in, I mean, I guess this story starts in 1982 when Vince buys the World Wrestling Federation from his father, Vince McMahon Sr., and he starts taking the steps towards making it a national promotion. A saying I've heard attributed to Vince is, you need two things to succeed in this business, talent and television. And those are the two things he loaded up on in the next couple years. He basically puts together the all-star team of other territories' talents. He gets Hulk Hogan from the AWA, gets Piper from Jim Crockett Promotions, gets Steamboat from Crockett, Orndorff from Georgia, Valentine from Crockett, Junkyard Dog from Mid-South, Iron Sheik, I think, had been working in Crockett around this time. Just goes around and picks and chooses all the talent he wants from other people's territories.
And in case you ever wondered how exactly he was able to do this, the simple fact is that Vince had a better TV deal with more exposure, and he just had the ability to offer more money. And that's really all it took in those days. The territories were so split up that guys would basically have to work all sorts of territories just to make a certain amount of money. Here, you could go to WWF, you could put your face on national TV, you could actually get over to a greater extent, be worth more when you went back to the territories, and just make more in the meanwhile. Like, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah, he had Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena, the world's most lucrative market. And when you look at a territory map, he's got Pennsylvania, so Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, New York, Boston, that whole Northeast. You compare the population there. This is also in the Northeast. This is before people have really started moving south and west. So you compare the amount of population in his territory versus, the Carolinas like Crockett had, or just the state of Florida, or what was Mid-South, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana. I mean, just the only one that would have been close would have been the AWA, having Minnesota, Chicago, most of the Midwest, and kind of all the way out to Las Vegas. But it's hard for anybody to compete with the amount of population and markets Vince has.
Yeah, and then we're talking about the USA deal, so they're on cable nationally. Like, it's a different level. It's not a mystery why all the best people from every territory went there, especially since a lot of those territories were falling on their ass right at the same time.
Yeah, well, and part of the reason they fell on their ass was Vince bought their TV out from under them. This was very expensive, but yeah, he goes around the country, tells station man, with briefcases of cash for station managers, says, play my show, I'll pay you to get on TV instead of us bartering. This is very expensive and was very risky, but this gets him exposure all over the country. He's buying out TV time from under every other territory. And for a little while, he actually tricked the other territories into sending tapes of their matches to him, and he would air them on USA, and they would kind of use this as research to see which guys from the territories they wanted and who was going to get over.
The other territories were so complicit in their own downfall. I mean,
it's one of those they deserve to go out of business.
Yeah, it was a stale model, and Vince saw it, and they didn't. This is all a much deeper topic for probably a whole other show about the death of the territories, which will be fascinating to talk about. But the main point we need to bring up here is that Vince was smart, and they were dumb.
Pretty much. So he gets on the USA Network in '83. They start running the All-American Wrestling show, which, yeah, as I said, started out showing kind of clips from other territories' matches, and then after a couple months, I think everybody figured out that he was just using that to get their talent exposure before he stole it from them, and then they started showing their own matches instead. And then, very famously, he buys Georgia Championship Wrestling, not because he wanted the promotion, but because he wanted their TV. He wanted their 6 o'clock Saturday night TV spot on TBS, which at this point, TBS is somewhere between cable and a network. It's, being beamed on satellite to a significant portion of the country. So it's the closest thing to true national TV you were getting at this point.
That's why it was called the Superstation.
Yeah. So, I mean, we don't need to go all into Black Saturday, but this ends up not working out. The show gets a really bad reaction from the Southern fans. I had always assumed it was, they didn't like the Northern wrestling, and that may have played a part in it. But I think the other thing was they had already seen this show on USA, and they didn't like that they were being shown the same show again. And also, Vince's TV at this point is kind of boring. It's all squash matches. Georgia had kind of a top-level TV show with a bunch of really great matches in front of a hot studio audience, whereas Vince is showing clips of house show matches from dimly lit arenas.
Yeah, and ultimately at this point the expansion is going on so hard that Vince can hardly give a shit and just sells the shit for like $100,000.
I've heard it was a lot. I've heard it was $1 million, which
really?
Helps finance WrestleMania. We'll get there in a minute, but yeah, he ends up selling the TV time to Jim Crockett, and this becomes Jim NWA World Championship Wrestling, WCW Saturday Night, various shows in some form. I think this show, Saturday Evening Wrestling on TBS, existed from like 1954 to 2000 or something like that.
Ooh,
yeah. That's the actual longest running episodic television show in cable history.
And I mean, to this day, a lot of people stopped watching wrestling when it ended because literally, it's the only wrestling show that they ever watched, and that's Southern Life.
6:05 on Saturday night, baby.
There you go. I knew people when I was a kid who would go home at 6 o'clock to watch that show. I had no concept of what it was because I only knew what WWF was. But I was like, what's at 6? What are you talking about?
I think it's a great time slot, actually. I would totally watch a wrestling show at 6 on Saturday. I think that would be perfect.
That would be so great. You can actually go out and do something afterwards, have dinner with your family, whatever. It's just, I hate wrestling in primetime because like it's always hard to watch. Yeah. Like maybe that's just because I'm an adult now, but like it's so hard to sit down at 8 o'clock on a Monday for 3 straight hours.
Well, yeah, the 3 hours plays a big role in that too. But yeah, I loved I remember as a kid that even though WCW Saturday Night was a garbage show by this point, I would always watch it because like what else did I have to do at 6 o'clock on Saturday?
Shit, I'd always watch WWE after Bourne at like 11 on a Saturday morning just because it's the weekend. I have time for this now.
Yeah, if I were them, if I were WWE, I mean, they don't need more TV, but I think I might want to replace SmackDown with something on the weekend instead.
That would be great, though. It would kind of cut into like NXT Day before pay-per-views, and like they have like a 4-day in a row thing that they do every month now.
Yeah, so I mean, further expanding their TV empire, they had Tuesday Night Titans and Primetime Wrestling on USA. They've got tons of syndication going in tons more markets. They're just taking over the airwaves.
Yeah. Let the record show that if you're one of those people who argues that overexposure is the thing that is killing WWE currently, just know that that was never not the case. They have always overexposed themselves as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, I can't even keep track. I mean, these were all 1-hour TV shows, although I guess the Saturday, the TBS show was 2 hours when it wasn't baseball season. But like I have trouble keeping track of all these shows they had at this point.
Yeah,
I don't
literally
think that many people were probably watching all of them, and a lot of them seemed like they were showing kind of the same things over and over. But still, just they had hours and hours of TV every week.
That's actually something I remember from being a kid. Is when I became conscious of what WWF was. It was so easy to find on TV, even in the days before it was easy to find stuff. You just had to like channel surf. Like so often there was just some WWF on TV.
Yeah. I mean, these syndicated shows end up going away in the 90s, but for a long time, this is the basis of their TV. The big shows are Superstars, Wrestling Challenge, various names they go through, but was the bedrock of their TV, were these syndicated shows airing Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon. So big signing is Hulk Hogan. He comes back from the AWA at the end of '83. We'll cover kind of the Hogan AWA split at some point because I think that's one of the more interesting and bigger what ifs in wrestling history. But he comes back at the end of '83 and wins the WWF title from the Iron Sheik 3 weeks later. They didn't wait at all to put the belt on him. They were just going with him.
Now, it's not just a matter of Hulk Hogan was so great they had to put the title on him right away. It's important to remember that no matter what WWF tries to tell you, Bob Backlund was a miserable failure as a champion. Just a destructive, miserable failure that took all the goodwill they built up from Bruno's time and basically took a huge dump on it.
It's insane that he was the champion for 6 years. He wasn't, for the last several years, he was not the main. The top guy was Jimmy Snuka. It was just Backlund was the champion.
Yeah, I mean, they just kept going and going because in WWF there had always been a super long-term babyface champion. But Bob Backlund was not over. It was horrible. They eventually, and the second that they have Hulk Hogan that they're going to bring from the AWA, they know the second that it becomes an option, it's just like, we finally found the solution. Get that fucking title off Backlund right now.
Yeah, Hogan had a solid run in the WWF in 1980, wrestled Andre the Giant at Shea Stadium, but really came into his own after that in the AWA. Was a massive draw. Their houses were like 60% bigger when he was on the card than when he wasn't, and a huge star in Japan at this time. And really, he was primarily a Japan guy. He was really just doing the AWA in between his Japan tours because the money over there was so much better.
I just want you guys to frame that in your heads properly, because as much as you guys say, like, as much as people in general say that Hulk Hogan doesn't know how to work or what he was like terrible, please remember that there was a time when Hulk Hogan was having 20-minute, awesome, drawn-out, strong-style matches for a living. And that's awesome.
Yeah. This is the era where he says he was wrestling 400 days a year because he would gain time when he was flying back from Japan.
That's a great quote.
I don't think it actually works that way. So Hogan is a big wrestling star. He was in Rocky III, so he's got a little bit of cultural exposure, but he's not what he would become. And really, the turning point is here working with Mr. T is what makes him a real celebrity.
Yeah, Mr. T is hard to explain to people who weren't alive in the 80s because on the surface, all Mr. T did was he was the villain in Rocky III and he was in the A-Team. But he was a bigger celebrity than that. He was just one of those guys who was always everywhere. He was in all sorts of commercials. He was in every magazine. He was just one of those interesting characters who was just all over the place all the time.
And he was perceived as being a legitimate tough guy.
Right.
He had won some reality show where they were trying to find the toughest bouncer in the world. I think this is kind of how he became famous. He was just perceived as being a guy who could actually fight, even though he had some legitimate, an amateur wrestling and boxing career, but I don't think there was a lot of reason to really think he was a real tough guy.
No, he was just one of those guys who had a lot of charisma. In those days, you could be like the quirky, awesome dude just by having like a feather in your hair or something like that. And then eventually we would get on to like Dennis Rodman, where you had to go a lot further to get people's attention.
Yeah. So the idea of a closed circuit supercard is conceived by Vince in the fall of 1984. Obviously, it's inspired by Starrcade. Jim Crockett Promotions had run Starrcade in 1983. That's may not be the first closed circuit wrestling show, but the first one that I know of, the first big one. But it was nowhere near as ambitious as what Vince wanted to do. Starrcade was only shown kind of in arenas around the Carolinas that they ran as part of their loop. It's nowhere near as big. Vince decides we got to do it bigger. We're going to do this nationwide. We're going to have 250 closed circuit locations around the country that we're going to show this in.
Now, have you ever watched anything closed circuit?
No.
I never have either, and I'm trying to imagine the appeal of it, where like you go to like your local basketball arena or whatever the case may be, and you just watch it on the big TVs that are suspended over the arena.
And maybe people cheer, maybe they don't. I don't really know.
Yeah, like I can't imagine the experience. Like I would love to talk to somebody who had actually been there and like sat through one of those. But again, this is in the era where you didn't have access to things like.
Pay-per-view really doesn't exist yet. There's a very small number of people who have access to pay-per-view.
Right. And as soon as the event's over, it's gone. Like there's not a huge VHS market.
No, there's no home video doesn't really come into it for a few more years.
So it's one of those things where like you could either go to the arena, sit in a seat and watch it on TV, or never see it at all in your life. And like that's an incredible concept for people today.
Yeah, today nothing is you're never missing anything. You can always track things down.
Yeah, I mean even Raw, which is conceivably just meant to like evaporate into mist as soon as it's over, like you can watch it on 30 streaming sites half an hour later.
It's on WWE Network 3 weeks later. It's on Hulu too if you want to go legit.
Yeah, and that's just one of those things. Like there's nothing but availability now.
Yeah, so. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on deposits and equipment and booking all these venues. Vince has tried closed circuit before. He helped promote the Evel Knievel Snake Canyon stunt. If you've ever seen this is where he's going to jump over this big canyon in some kind of rocket ship, and he ended up kicking out of it after like 2 seconds. Anyway, that show totally bombed, lost a bunch of money. And Vince also helped promote the Ali Inoki fight, which was shown on closed circuit in America and was also a complete failure. So he's 0 for 2 on closed circuit coming into this.
Which, I mean, I can't really blame him for Ali Inoki because you would think that would be just enormous big business box office. He couldn't have known that it was going to be like Sweep Kicks the match.
Yeah, but people didn't know that. But I think in America, I don't know that many people knew who Inoki was.
I guess that's fair.
Um, but yeah, so I mean, this is like I don't. There's probably some myth making here in terms of the company wasn't going to go out of business if this show didn't succeed, but Vince was going to be broke and need to get some loans and probably bring in a partner to help run the company, which I think would have ended in disaster because I can't imagine Vince sharing with someone else.
Now, at this point, is he still paying the payments to the original committee members?
Yes, that is the one. That is the one thing. The way when he bought the company from his dad, he didn't have the money to buy it all at once. So the agreement was he would make these scheduled payments to his dad and to the other owners. I don't Gorilla Monsoon, and I think there's one other guy. I can't think of who it was.
Was it still Toots Montt, or was he
Probably
already
Toots.
dead?
If Toots Montt was alive, it would be him. But
Okay.
yeah, he has to make these payments. If he fails to make any of the payments, control of the company lapses back to the previous owners. His dad is dead by now, but Gorilla Monsoon is still around, and I guess would have become the owner of the WWF if Vince couldn't pay.
Yeah. It's not so much that WWF wouldn't exist, but in its current incarnation, it certainly wouldn't exist. Vince McMahon as the czar of wrestling probably wouldn't exist. Like, WrestleMania changed more things than it's really possible to go into or explain. Not just about WWF, but about the wrestling world in general, or what was possible, what could actually work. Everyone in the wrestling industry before this happened knew it was going to fail. No matter what they tell you now, like if you go back and read interviews at the time, just people like territory owners just laughing their asses off at the hubris of this.
Yeah. And I think one thing is they were not really drawing that well outside of the Northeast at this point. Like that was part of why they were so far in the red was they'd bought all this TV and they were touring around the country, but they hadn't really broken through most of these places, so they're running to half full houses.
And there's an alternate universe where nobody gives a shit about WrestleMania, and WrestleMania dies, and fuck, they lose their NBC deal, and Dick Ebersol doesn't help anymore. And I don't even want to go down that road because we do alternative booking on every single one of our podcasts. But fuck.
Yeah, this was high stakes. Like I said, I think in the kind of official history, it probably gets exaggerated a little bit because it's a good story, but a lot was on the line for Vince here.
Absolutely.
So company lore is that Howard Finkel came up with the name WrestleMania, inspired by Beatlemania. Hilariously, Vince originally wanted to call the show The Colossal Tussle.
The Colossal Tussle.
Branding is important. If this show had been called The Colossal Tussle, do you think there would have been a Colossal Tussle too?
I do not think that there would have, no. But I got to give Vince some credit here, because if you think it's easy to come up with a name for a wrestling show, I invite you to try to do it at home right now. Just go ahead and pause the podcast and just think up a great name for a wrestling show that isn't taken, because I've tried many times and it's damn near impossible.
I'm trying to think what I would have gone with. Maybe WrestleFest, the Big Battle, something like that. I mean, yeah, none of these sound good.
Yeah, Ultra Fest doesn't even sound like a wrestling show.
So George Scott says he talked Vince out of calling it the Colossal Tussle by kind of daintily walking around the room, pretending to be Jim Barnett and saying the Colossal Tussle over and over.
What a hero.
Good work, George. I mean, George Scott is another of those guys who has been disappeared from history kind of because of how his tenure ended, but he books the first two WrestleManias and is the primary booker of several years of the WWF here. He's in the Patterson role before Patterson.
Oh, man. And he's so influential in getting people there and just making Vince credible, because nobody outside of WWF and a lot of people inside of WWF didn't consider Vince McMahon to be anything but a shadow of his father.
Yeah, punk ass kid with his dad's money.
Yeah, but having George Scott there is just like, oh, well, I guess if he's on the kid's side. George Scott was always a staunch ally of Vince's.
Yeah, George Scott had been the booker in for Crockett before he came to the WWF, so he knows Piper and Steamboat and all these other Crockett guys. So when he starts calling them saying you should come up here, come work up here in the north, his word carries a lot of weight.
Absolutely.
So they ran two big MTV specials on the way into this show. The first is The Brawl to End It All. That's July 23rd, 84, with Wendy Richter versus the Fabulous Moolah. Cyndi Lauper is in Wendy Richter's corner. As I think everyone kind of knows, she met Lou Albano because they cast him in the Girls Just Want to Have Fun video. Her boyfriend, David Wolf, was also her manager and was a big wrestling fan. So he makes this whole deal happen and is accidentally responsible for the 1980s wrestling boom.
Yeah, that's the funniest thing, is that rock and wrestling is really Cyndi Lauper. I mean, that's the rock portion of the rock and wrestling.
Yeah, there are no other rock stars involved in this show.
But she's another person that has been kind of lost to history, because you might know who Cyndi Lauper is, but you not remember that at that time she was as popular as Madonna.
Yeah, what would the equivalent of like a Taylor Swift or Katy Perry doing WrestleMania today?
Right, and actually being involved in it, like passionately.
Yeah, actually caring and wanting to do a good job.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not just that Cyndi Lauper is there or that she's involved. She's into it. Like, she loves it. Like, she is the star more so than the person who she's kind of valeting for.
Yeah, I would say after Mr. T, she is probably the person who drew the second most people to this show. It's between her and Piper.
Absolutely.
And speaking of Piper, he doesn't get his due historically. Like, he is such a great antagonist. He had so much heat. And the real feud for this show was between him and Mr. T. That's what was drawing.
Yeah. Obviously, Hulk Hogan is who we sort of have immortalized as the star from this era and kind of the star of rock and wrestling. It's important to note that the biggest part in getting that thing going underway is the MTV specials, which were in front of an incredible number of eyes, and Roddy Piper is the star of those.
Yeah. Isn't it fascinating that the first big cable special they run on MTV, it's a women's match they go with, and then women's wrestling disappears after this?
This is one of the most fascinating things, because for years you've had to hear the incredibly bullshit argument that women can't draw. And Vince knows damn well that they do.
Yeah, it's not insane to think that men might want to watch pretty women do athletic things and fight. It's not a crazy idea. And this MTV special drew a 9.0 rating. Just
the simple fact that it took them so long to go do any women's wrestling again, or that they discredit it so heavily in the 90s and thousands, is in direct opposition to the success they had with it in the 80s.
Yeah, I don't really know the story behind like why they ran Wendy Richter versus Moolah. I think it might have just been like when they were ticking off the things they could do, MTV was interested in the idea of a women's match.
Now, was this the end of like Moolah's 54-year title reign or whatever she claims it is?
Yeah, she lost the title to Richter.
So maybe that's part of what it was, is that you just have this title, like you can be like the 20-year title reign of the Fabulous Moolah.
Could be. So then the next big development, Hogan and Piper kick their feud off at Madison Square Garden on December 28th. Cyndi Lauper is being given a gold record award. Albano is there. David Wolf is in the ring. Hogan is in the ring. Piper shows up, says he doesn't like that devil's rock and roll music.
What a heel.
Yeah. Smashes the gold record over Albano's head and then brutally slams David Wolf. Like, I think he starts to get him up, and then a cop jumps in the ring who's not part of the show, and so Piper has to kind of pull out and just spinebuster Wolf right to the mat.
Oh my God, it looks so good. If you go back and watch that, he kills him.
Yeah. The number of the cops in this era are so fascinating to me because they are not smartened up at all. They do not know what's going on with this show, and it seems like a lot of angles run afoul of the police in this era.
Vince's relationship with kayfabe is so interesting because obviously he kind of just throws it by the wayside the second that the company's big enough that it doesn't really matter if you know it's fake or not anymore. So like you don't get a lot of examples of Vince trying to deal with like smartening people up and stuff like that. But the company was not very good at that. Like in the South,
There's a couple on. I mean, Ali on this show is a good example of that. I think.
yeah, Ali was not smartened up to the finish. We all understand that. But like in the South, cops just kind of generally understood, all right, we got to get the heels out of here. You know what I mean? Like let them do their shit and then we got to protect them from the crowd. This, like, people didn't understand. The cops were just like, the people, like, heels were getting jumped by officers of the law because they were stirring up trouble.
I just love that. Like, oh, he hit him with a chair. That's assault with a deadly weapon. We got to arrest him.
Get him.
Yeah. And they're running from the police to get out of the arena.
I just love the idea that, like, a cop would be walking by a movie set and be like, oh, he shot him with a gun. Let's get him.
I mean, Jim Cornette's talked about it. I've never heard him say how many times he thinks he was arrested back in the 80s, but it was quite a few.
Oh my God, it's so good. Like that's the only thing about kayfabe dying that is really sad is that you don't get those moments anymore.
You don't get riots anymore.
Oh God.
So the second special is the War to Settle the Score. That's February 18th, 85. That's the Hogan Piper match. They, of course, go to a DQ, as their matches really always did. Piper, Bob Orton, and Paul Orndorff all jump in the ring and attack Hogan. They're beating on him, and Mr. T, who's sitting in the front row, jumps the railing, gets in the ring, and runs the heels off, and we've got our WrestleMania main event set.
Now, this is one of those things where it's hard for some people who only watch WWE to understand that, like, the way that they booked shows was different back then, or the way they booked shows in other countries, other promotions is different. Like, for example, if this show was held today, Hogan versus Piper would have 100% been the main event of the first WrestleMania. And a lot of people ask to this day why it wasn't, and why we never really got a Hogan versus Piper match after that. And the first reason
people were not buying closed circuit tickets to see a Hogan Piper match at this point.
Exactly. And the point is that you didn't book to singles matches like that. That was for house shows.
Yeah.
House shows is where you made your money. And if Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper wrestle, somebody's got to do the job. And nobody's going to do that job.
So the last Madison Square Garden house show before this is 2 weeks before. It's March 17th. There's a big angle, a Piper's Pit with Hogan, Mr. T, and Jimmy Snuka, who's just kind of around. I think he was the insurance in case Mr. T ended up no-showing. They would have just subbed Snuka in there and hoped that people didn't get too angry. They're about to fight, and Hogan, Piper, and Orndorff take off. The main event of that show was Greg Valentine versus Tito Santana in a lumberjack match for the Intercontinental title. Valentine retained, and highlights of this match would air on Primetime Wrestling 3 weeks later after WrestleMania. And they didn't book Valentine versus Tito on WrestleMania because they didn't want to give that away. They wanted to protect the house shows instead.
Yeah, that's probably the single biggest consideration you have to make when you look back at these pay-per-view eras, because you kind of just see the pay-per-views independently of anything else. And you're just like, well, why didn't they do this here? Or why wasn't this followed up on? Why didn't they continue this feud? Why didn't they blow this off? The answer is because house shows were the whole business. That was the model. Pay-per-views were just kind of a thing on the side to show nationally. Like that wasn't the whole business model like it later became.
So part of the way Vince financed this show, as we mentioned, he sells back the Saturday night time slot, sells it to Jim Crockett. So the last episode of whatever the show was called on TBS is March 25th, 1 week before WrestleMania, and it's just kind of an unceremonious sign-off for an unsuccessful experiment.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that Vince basically sold that TV spot to Jim Crockett, thus creating his own competition nationally.
Yes, and also pissed off Ted Turner in the process, which is why part of why Ted Turner bought WCW and was willing to pump a ton of money into it just to get even with Vince.
The ripples of history cascading through time.
Yeah. So a week out, this is looking like a catastrophe. They've barely sold any tickets. They haven't even covered their deposits. It's looking like they're fucked. And then they get lucky in the home stretch.
And then some incredibly weird once-in-a-lifetime shit starts happening.
I think the Richard Belzer incident is pretty famous now, but to recap, Hogan and Mr. T are booked on Richard Belzer's talk show March 27th, 4 days before WrestleMania. You know, Belzer is, as is the style of the time, kind of being a smartass, you know, prodding him about wrestling being fake. So he asks Hogan to demonstrate a hold on him. Hogan puts him in a front face lock, puts it on kind of snug, and Belzer passes out. Hogan lets go of him. He goes flat on the floor, slams the back of his head on the concrete floor, and is bleeding everywhere. This is on live TV.
Couple things about this. One, Richard Belzer is the old guy from Law and Order SVU, just for context, for you kids who may not know otherwise who he is. Number two, this was fucking hilarious.
Yes, this clip is on YouTube. Go watch this. It's just nobody knows what's going on. Hogan has no idea that the guy has passed out. I don't think he was gonna, you know, stiff him a little bit because that's what you did. I don't think he meant to, you know, John Stossel him.
No, not at all. Like, he kind of locks it in, but he's all smiles and he's grinning like, "Hey, let me cinch it in on you, brother," and then he just fucking collapses.
Yeah, he's knocked out. They go to commercial and come back, and he's been taken to the hospital. And Hogan is there. I don't even know who he's talking to, but he's, you know, very upset and apologetic about all this.
Now, the other great thing about this is, first of all, Hulk Hogan, is he the most credible submission wrestler in WWE history? Because he actually choked somebody out on live TV.
It's him or Ken Shamrock.
That is fucking amazing. And second of all, if you were going to do a hold for show, why would you do that one where you can't really see what's happening and you might choke someone out for real? Do a full Nelson, Hulk. Come on.
Yeah, or just get him up for an airplane spin. How awesome a moment would that have been?
Yeah, you could do anything. You're Hulk Hogan and he's Richard Belzer. But no, you decide to cut off his windpipe and down he goes.
Yeah, Belzer ends up suing Hogan and settled for at least six figures is what I've heard.
But the best thing about it is that the story that goes out, like in like People Magazine, everyone who's talking about it, is that Richard Belzer heckles wrestler, gets his comeuppance. Yeah. Everyone takes Hogan's side.
Yeah, this is on top of the, you know, Dr. David Schultz, John Stossel incident where Stossel was doing an investigative report on whether wrestling was real, asked David Schultz if it was fake, and Schultz slapped the shit out of him.
Yes.
Which is what you did at that time if somebody, you know, gave some lip to you.
It's just such a great time in the business where you could just haul off and hit somebody and be like, yeah, it's real, brother.
Yeah. And then the other big thing, you know, famously, they got to host Saturday Night Live the night before the show. They were the substitute hosts. The person who was supposed to host got sick. I can't remember who it was going to be. So they were just kind of available and in New York on short notice and got subbed in. This is a big deal back then, even though I think this may have been a down period for Saturday Night Live. It's still a cultural institution at this point with a much bigger audience than it has today.
This is probably the most exposure a wrestler has ever gotten on a national scale. Like, I can't think of another time where a wrestler was on this degree of a national, like, television show that had this many eyes in front of it. Like, this may have been the most people who had ever seen a wrestler on their TV.
Yeah, I mean, this is an incredible break they get the night before the show, and somehow they pull this off. The walk-up business ends up being just absolutely enormous. They go from we're fucked to we grossed $4 million, which is a stunning amount of money for this point. I mean, before this, your only revenue stream is the gate, and you know, $100,000 gate was good business in this era. You know, a good garden gate. They did 500,000 at the gate for this show at the Garden with a sellout, which was a really strong number. Multiple millions of dollars in one night was unheard of at this point.
Yeah. And see, it wasn't just the gate in this example, it was also closed circuit. WrestleMania is given credit for a lot of things, but what it may not be given enough credit for is convincing Vince McMahon that there are other ways of making money than traditional wrestling ways. And that's a big reason why he'll expand into cable much more than anyone else. He'll become the king of pay-per-view soon after this. He'll expand into all these different ventures, lots of which are failures, but this
licensing was his other big success. Merchandise. Yes. Nobody else figured that out before he did. That you can sell T-shirts and toys and posters and everything else.
Yeah, the concept of multiple revenue streams is something that's very simple to a businessman, but had completely defied wrestling promoters up until this point.
It's just so odd because I don't know where Vince gets it. Like, he went to college, but he was a terrible student, like almost flunked out, went to East Carolina University and got a business degree, was a salesman and apparently not a very good one. But, somehow he just had this promoter's gene or just figured out how to run this like a real business that no one else had before.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not like there was anybody in his year who had more experience at what he was trying to do than he was. I mean, he's literally a person in an industry who is the first person ever to even try the things that he's thinking about. It's impossible to say where he even got any of these fucking ideas or where he got the balls to actually try them.
Well, with the closed circuit, I think he saw Starrcade and said, let's do that, but bigger. And like closed circuit broadcasts had been tried before. Boxing did closed circuit. It's just he, has the idea that we can go really big with this in a way no one else had tried.
Yeah, and I guess that's sort of the genius that everyone's always told you about Vince McMahon, is he'll take other people's ideas and make them work or make them better. Just add that special something. And like, he didn't invent pay-per-view. He didn't invent licensing. He didn't invent closed circuit, but he made them work and no one else could.
Yeah. So to get into the show, it's March 31st, 1985. It's a Sunday afternoon, a 1:00 bell time. Looking this up, there was a home New York Rangers hockey game that night, which I find insane, but they took down the ring and set up the ice after the show was over.
I just love that that's like the 80s equivalent to being preempted for the Westminster Dog Show.
Yeah, I mean, I think they normally ran matinees at the Garden, but 1 p.m. East Coast is 10 a.m. West Coast, and that's a really early start for the West Coast venues.
Yeah, and that's especially weird because, like, especially for the closed circuit TV locations, it's like, man, are you going to get up at 10 o'clock to go to an arena to watch something on TV? Like, it's an odd idea, and if they had been able to do it in prime time, I wonder how much better that would have been for them.
Yeah, they sold out the Garden, 19,121 fans, $500,000 gate. Really, I've never seen a number of pay-per-view buys. I think, a very small percentage of the country had access to pay-per-view at this point. So virtually no one bought it on pay-per-view, but they sold 400,000 closed circuit tickets. So they end up with about a $4 million gross. Inflation adjusted $10 million, which again is just so much more money than anyone's ever made in one night doing wrestling before this.
And to go from really not that much money to suddenly here's a check for $4 million is like, what the hell?
Yeah. So on commentary, we've got the classic team of Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura. They're the team that called the first 6 WrestleManias, and just kind of those are the voices I associate with this event.
Yeah, and Jesse's so damn good. Like, he's probably my favorite part of this show, and this isn't even like a great Jesse show.
No. So as we start out, we have Easy Lover by Phil Collins playing over stills of New York City.
Easy Lover by Phil fucking Collins is the first ever
song.
Easy Lover. That's...
It's the instrument. Well, I can't even tell if it's a dub on the network or if it's just an instrumental.
I mean, according to Wikipedia, it was in the original.
Yeah. Oh no, there's
Yeah.
lots of music they didn't pay for that was in the original that's been dubbed over on the network.
That's
Hogan was
amazing.
still coming out to Eye of the Tiger at this point.
That's awesome.
Yeah, at some point around 1986, the record companies like sent them a letter and was like, "Hey, you're gonna pay us for this, right?" And then they stopped using licensed music.
And that's still a thing that wrestling promotions go through today. Like, oops, we got too big. All of a sudden, the record companies noticed us.
Yeah. You know you're over when you get Vince to pay music rights. Like Ronda Rousey using her Joan Jett song, or Punk getting him to pay for Cult of Personality. He just won't do it, which is probably smart.
Yeah, let me put that better. You know you have Vince over a barrel at the negotiating table when he lets you have licensed music.
Yeah. Or your Triple H, and you can just get Metallica music if you want it. But I mean, they dubbed the Metallica music he's used before on the network, so I think they just paid a one-time fee for that.
My favorite, I think the most classic example of this, maybe the greatest thing ever, was when Undertaker came out to Ain't No Grave by Johnny Cash, and they replaced it with Supernatural by Katy Perry on the NBC broadcast.
It really fit, though.
It did. It was weird.
Yeah. So Monsoon and Heenan welcome us to the show. Gorilla calls it the wrestling extravaganza of all time, which is a Vince line if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, that's so Vince.
Extravaganza. Has to be pronounced that way, too.
We've watched so many shows recently where Vince is on commentary that I kind of missed him doing the intro for this.
Yeah, no gravel voice Vince here.
Sadly.
He hadn't started using that voice yet. I feel like that comes a few years later.
No, this is still swanky Vince, where he's like, well, I'm Vince McMahon.
Yeah,
like
Howard Cosell impersonation Vince.
Yeah. I don't know when exactly he gets into gravel voice gravitas of Vince McMahon, but it's a weird transition.
So they pitch it to Howard Finkel. He introduces Gene Okerlund, who does a terrible rendition of the Star Spangled Banner. How is Gene Okerlund singing the national anthem?
Well, according to the mythology of the time, is there was a celebrity that they had planned that they were keeping secret, and that person no-showed on them. So Gene was the last-minute option. Yeah. And to this day, Vince and Gene will not say who that person was.
Billy Joel?
I mean, that's who I would think that it would be, especially in New York at this time.
And the other thing is, subsequent to this, they have a series of amazing performers. They have Ray Charles at WrestleMania 2, Aretha Franklin at WrestleMania 3, Gladys Knight at WrestleMania 4. They proceed to hit home runs with, not National Anthem, but America the Beautiful for the next couple of years after this.
If you don't get, let's say it's Billy Joel, if you don't get him, why even put the Star Spangled Banner or like the anthem as part of the show? Just don't do it. You don't have to have Gene go out there and do it.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't have to be on the broadcast.
Yes.
I'm trying to think. I don't think they actually do the national anthem at shows anymore.
Not any I've ever been to, but I've never been to like a big show.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely don't. They do America the Beautiful for WrestleMania because that's just become tradition now. But yeah, I don't know why they did this here.
Very odd.
Like I said, nothing really to the setup. Not even mats on the floor. They've got basically the hard camera and one other camera. There's no set. Guys just come through the tunnel. Because it's the Garden, the entrance is super cramped. Like people can just reach out and touch them as they're walking to the ring.
Which, I mean, that does cause really cool visuals because they'll do that for a little while. And that'll cause a little really cool people just reaching out for Hulk. And like some of those famous pictures of him coming through with like the fog and the lights and people reaching for him. Like that's really cool. But at the same time, super dangerous.
One thing I love for the big entrance, for like the bigger stars, they've actually got cops walking them to the ring. And I just think that looks so cool.
It's always such a cool visual to see that.
And then we pitch to Lord Alfred Hayes, who basically shits his pants on live TV.
This is way too big a moment for our sweet little cupcake, Alfred Hayes.
I am Lord Alfred Hayes here at WrestleMania, the entertainment extravaganza of all time.
My favorite thing is Mean Gene really just seems like whatever.
Yeah. Mean Gene just wants to get back to his cigarette and Merlot.
Let's say biggest show of all time. Fine. Same as all the other ones. Sing the national anthem. Whatever. I got this.
Gene is such a fucking smooth operator.
He could and would do anything. No big deal.
How does Mean Gene Okerlund not have a podcast? Every fucking wrestling personality of ever has a podcast, and Mean Gene doesn't.
That's a great point. If they had podcasts in the 90s, Mean Gene would be the king of podcast all time. And the stories he must have, you know?
He can still do it today. He's been a guest. He was definitely on Flares at some point, and the stories were pretty damn hilarious.
Yeah, maybe he's just too old at this point and he doesn't want to bother with it. But man, the things that Mean Gene could tell you, just like tell us about who cut the shittiest promos. I could listen to that all day.
Who are you yelling at to put that cigarette out that one time?
That was
so Alfred Hayes introduces the opening match, which is Tito Santana versus the Executioner. Mean Gene first interviews Tito Santana. He says he'll beat the Executioner because Executioner's never had a match this big. Then Mean Gene interviews the Executioner. He says, I'm going after your leg, Tito Santana. Your leg. The one that was injured by Greg Valentine.
Now, was it injured in that match that hasn't aired yet?
Yes.
Oh, good. Oh, good. So that makes lots of sense.
So the Executioner is Playboy Buddy Rose, who was a pretty big star, but on the downside of his career here. I believe this is probably the only time he played this Executioner character. It's just old-time carny promoting where you don't want to beat a star on TV, so you dress him up in a gimmick that they're only going to use this one time. So the Executioner, they say, we know nothing about him, but he's undefeated.
Yeah. There are sometimes, like back in the day, you used to just kind of put a mask on a guy and he was just a heel. This is not a cool looking mask. No, this is not a good look. And he's like kind of just, I mean, Playboy Buddy Rose is a big fat bastard, which was always part of his appeal, is that he was the, quote, Playboy Buddy Rose. But like, if you put a mask on him and it's not Buddy Rose anymore, he just looks like a fat sack of shit.
Yeah. This was a pretty decent match for, the mid 1980s. Tito's a good worker. Rose could work too. Kind of the basic stuff from Tito: backdrop, drop kick, some headlock takedowns. At one point, he gets him in a headlock, runs up the ropes, and kind of rolls through into a pin, which is a really cool high spot for 1985.
Tito Santana was genuinely cool.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
He kind of gets lost in time too, just because he was kind of in the opening match of every WrestleMania for a while.
Wrestles on the first 9 WrestleManias.
And according to history, whether you believe this or not, like he was originally considered to take Bret Hart's role as like the top babyface after Hogan. That's like a whole other what if scenario.
That seems like I can believe he was on the list, but that they were just like, he's too old, and he was a mid card. He was really kind of far down the mid card at that point.
Right. But if you're looking at people who were dependable and always had good matches, that was probably just Tito from this period of time. I mean, Tito and Ricky Steamboat, and Ricky Steamboat was not considered dependable.
Yeah. So this ends up being a solid match. Tito wins with the flying forearm, and then the figure 4, which is meant to send a message to Greg Valentine. Like I said, pretty good opening match.
Yeah. And literally the first match in the history of WrestleMania is the first example in WrestleMania history of a WrestleMania match leading to a feud, like just being part of a feud that blows off later. Like, that's pretty funny to me, is that even the very first match is just like, yeah, we'll blow this off at a later show.
Yeah, so from here, Tito, continues to be a reliable mid-card workhorse, intercontinental level babyface for years and years to come. And Buddy Rose is pretty much finished with the WWF. He's out shortly after this, comes back for a short run in the early 90s. But this was pretty much the end of his career.
Yeah, unfortunately, because Buddy Rose had some spectacular, spectacular matches over the years. I definitely recommend that you look him up if you've never seen his work before.
Next up, we've got King Kong Bundy against Special Delivery Jones. Each match has pre-recorded comments. Only thing significant here is Bundy says, "3's not enough. I'm going to need a 5 count."
3 ain't enough, man. I need 5.
Yeah. Bundy, managed by Jimmy Hart here. Bundy is so fucking big. 6'6", 450, I'd say.
Yeah, he's enormous in a way that you just didn't see guys be back then.
There's nobody this size anymore.
That's fair.
They wouldn't let somebody. I don't think they'd let somebody this fat wrestle now. He'd be violating the wellness policy in some way.
But it's weird because he's not just like outrageously grossly fat, like say a Viscera, and that's like his whole size. He's just big. He's just like a big bulky dude.
He can move too. He shows it off here. So this is a mega squash match, and I love it. SD Jones is just kind of the only wins he would ever get would be over jobbers on TV. He's a jobber to the stars. Bundy grabs Jones in a bear hug, rams him into the corner, hits the corner avalanche and a splash. That's the whole match. Now the weirdness is this took 20 to 25 seconds, but for some reason they claim it was only 9 seconds.
To give them the record, I guess.
Some record.
Now, this record will eventually be broken by The Rock beating Eric Rowan at WrestleMania later, which is very random. And I don't even remember what the context for that was.
The last match of The Rock's career to date.
It's the quickest match in WWE history.
It's where it's where he's doing a promo and the Wyatt family come out and shit talk him, and he hilariously rips off his clothes and has his wrestling gear on underneath.
Now, and in fairness, that's a good moment, but I kind of wish they just let Special Delivery Jones have this in the annals of wrestling history. This is the one thing he gets to have, and you had to take it from him.
Like I said, good little squash here. Bundy put over like a Superman. Clear he's going to be challenging Hogan. Ends up being the main event of WrestleMania 2.
And to some extent will be blamed for the failure of WrestleMania 2.
Yeah. Next up, we've got interviews with the Mr. Maniac, Matt Bourne, and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Bourne says Steamboat is too nice a guy to beat him. Matt Bourne is the most generic heel here. It's like, oh, he wears sunglasses. He must be a heel.
Yeah. Matt Bourne is a great worker. And he was a great worker in a lot of different territories in a lot of different ways. But it's very amusing to me that despite being a great worker and being over in a lot of territories, the only really successful period of his career will be as Doink the Clown.
Yeah. Not really. I can't remember anything else he did other than this match, other than beating Doink.
The Lumberjack, man. Lumberjack.
Yes,
Big Josh.
How could I forget?
His team with PN News.
Yeah. This is the only real match of significance. After this, he doesn't have anything significant in the WWF until Doink. Good Ricky Steamboat match. Just, he's doing leapfrogs and arm drags and all of his awesome Ricky Steamboat stuff. Can't put the guy over enough. He was just awesome.
Yeah. There is nobody who will ever be as smooth as Ricky Steamboat. This is just something that you should accept as a fact of reality that will never change.
He ends up getting the win with the flying crossbody. It's another kind of 4 or 5 minute match, but this is one they could have afforded to give some more time because it wasn't like they had anything they needed to get to on this show.
Oh, but there are only 2 matches on this entire show that go over 10 minutes, and one of them is this next one. So let's tell the people what got more than 10 minutes when this one only got 4.
David Sammartino versus Brutus the fucking Barber.
Okay, everybody sit down. I assume that you're standing. Sit down and just hold a loved one's hand and think about this very seriously. Brutus the Barber Beefcake versus David Sammartino is allotted the second most time of anything on this show, to the extent where if you combine the Intercontinental Championship match and the Ricky Steamboat match, the 2 only matches with real workhorses in them on the entire show, it comes 1 second short of the time they gave Brutus Beefcake and David Sammartino.
Yeah, not great matchmaking here.
What the fuck?
So first they interview Bruno and David, and like you can see David just like shrink in his father's shadow. And like literally every time he's about to say something, Bruno jumps in and cuts him off. Like can't let him get a word in.
Like everybody's seen just sons that could not live up to their father's legacy
There's
before,
plenty of them in wrestling.
but nobody is the fucking textbook case like David
Oh,
Sammartino,
all
who is just
five of them.
he's garbage, and Bruno knows it.
Yeah. And Bruno is around for a couple more years here, but he just realized at some point that he was there to help his son out, but it was clear they were only using his son to keep Bruno on the card, and that leads to one of his initial fallings out with Vince Jr.
But they'll keep trying with David into the 90s. Like they just this is what happens with second generation wrestlers if their fathers were big stars, is they just never stop trying. There's just always the assumption that maybe if you try this or try this, he'll just magically turn into his dad.
Yeah, I don't think I don't understand how anybody could have looked at David Sammartino and thought he is so tiny.
Oh my god,
He's like a fire hydrant.
He looks horrible. And he's so obviously on steroids. Like, it's bad.
And Bruno just pretended not to know.
Like, he's on the gas more than anyone's ever been on the gas.
And then we go to interview Luscious, Johnny Valiant, and Brutus Beefcake. Valiant asks Beefcake to tell him what he's going to do, and Beefcake makes a farting noise with his mouth.
And then Valiant says, I'm not going to let him talk.
This is just like some of the not ready for prime time WWF stuff, because a couple years after this promo never would have made air.
And there just wasn't that level of control. Obviously, as WWF goes on, like you see Vince's hand over it as he learns what works and what doesn't and everything. You see like his control over every minutia of the product grow and grow. But here it's just like guys are just going on TV doing whatever the fuck they feel like.
Yeah. So this match is just trash. It's 10, 11 minutes long, feels like 30. David Sammartino has zero charisma in the ring, zero fire. All he does are like amateur wrestling takedown type moves. And as we kind of know, Brutus Beefcake was not much of a worker either.
Here's the thing. He was trying to become his dad, but it's debatable whether Bruno Sammartino would have gotten over being Bruno Sammartino in 1985 either. Like, it's obviously a very different time. Trying to be Bruno is a stupid idea.
Yeah. I mean, Bruno, however, is the most over guy on this show.
Oh,
the reaction he gets when he comes out with David is enormous.
Yeah, he gets a big reaction when he and Valiant get into it.
Yeah, that's probably maybe the biggest pop of the night when him and Jimmy V go at it, which is how this match ends. Managers start fighting, the thing gets thrown out. Of course, this led to Bruno and David against Beefcake and Jimmy V on the house shows. Again, using WrestleMania to set the house shows up.
I would just like to point out that there aren't that many people in wrestling history who have wrestled both Hulk Hogan and Bruno Sammartino. And for some reason, Brutus the fucking Barber Beefcake is one of those people.
Guy always was in the right place at the right time.
Fucking hell.
So this really should have just been like a 5 or 2 minute match to get to that finish, or just don't have a match at all. Just have the fight start before the match.
Absolutely. Or just have the tag match here. Just do something else than what you do, which is dedicate valuable time on your biggest show ever to this.
Yeah. Next up, we've got the Intercontinental Championship. Greg Valentine defending against the Junkyard Dog. JYD is one of the first guys to get an entrance and the first guy with entrance music on this show. On the network, they've clearly dubbed over Another One Bites the Dust.
Yeah, which is a shame because that was a great, great entrance for him.
Yes. As Jesse puts it, he comes out shucking and jiving. Never took Jesse long to get into that.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Valentine looks great here. This is probably the best shape I ever saw him in.
Yeah, you can kind of see why people consider Greg Valentine to actually be like a worthwhile star, because later in the 80s, like by WrestleMania 3, Valentine looks like shit and like he doesn't care and everything sucks. Here, he looks like a star in the making.
Yeah, well, he's old. I mean, he's old by this point, but I mean, him and Piper in that dog collar match at the first Starrcade is amazing.
Yeah.
He's just a guy who hit his peak kind of before the national era.
Yeah, unfortunately. JYD's kind of that too, because
Oh yeah,
he's already way past his prime at this point.
I mean, JYD always sucked in the ring. He's pretty much. I mean, he's the number 2 babyface at this point, though.
Oh yeah, like and he's
maybe,
over.
I mean, Andre's his own thing, but yeah, I mean, he's one of the top guys in the company.
And it's worth mentioning that a lot of guys who came from the territories remained popular in the area where their territories are. They didn't necessarily get over the same way in front of the national audience. JYD is from, like, his territory was New Orleans and Louisiana, like the deep South. And he got over nationally and in the Northeast. That's crazy hard to do.
It's easy to see why, though. He is so charismatic.
Oh my god, like very few people in history were as or more charismatic than JYD.
Really great promos, and you just protect him in the ring.
Yep.
So Valentine works on the leg, goes for the figure 4. JYD blocks it. Lots of JYD headbutts ensue. Jimmy Hart distracts JYD. Valentine accidentally hits Hart, and then kind of out of nowhere, Valentine pins JYD with his feet on the ropes.
It's almost to the extent like where you'd be like, oh, I guess the ref gave him a time cue because that last match went too long.
Probably David Sammartino's fault.
Yep.
Tito Santana runs out. He, of course, is feuding with Valentine. He tells the referee that Valentine had his feet on the ropes. Ref orders Valentine to get back in the ring, but Valentine refuses and takes a walk. He's counted out, and that's our finish. I love how, like, innocent a time this is where the fans pop huge for this shitty finish. Right. Because the babyface technically won.
And this is that thing that they just kept doing. In fact, they still do it today, where it's just like, hey, the babyface won by disqualification, so it's not all bad guys.
Yeah. But this is the era where you could have the greatest match in history, and if the heel won, people would be furious. And you could have the shittiest match ever, but if the babyface won, people would be deliriously happy.
Do you understand how easy booking must have been back then? Just like, God. Whatever.
Because it's like a real sport. When your team wins, you don't care if it was a good game or a bad game.
Right. And now these days, like it genuinely does not really matter who wins the matches. It genuinely doesn't. As long as the match was good,
now it's like a movie. People don't care if the good guys survived at the end or not.
Yeah.
Next up, for the World Tag Team Championship, we have a supremely weird match. The U.S. Express of Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda defend against the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. Windham and Rotunda just seem completely out of place in this era of the WWF.
Who's being used more against type here? Barry Windham or Mike Rotunda?
Man, Barry Windham is just not a good fit for New York wrestling.
Like, here's the thing about Barry Windham. Barry Windham doesn't have an amazing look. Like, he's a big guy, but he doesn't. Next to all the super jacks,
he could stand. Yeah, he could stand to do some setups.
But his whole appeal was that he had a ton of babyface fire and he could go for 60 minutes, even though he looked like shit. He's sort of the Chris Hero of his day. And Mike Rotunda sucks at wrestling.
I don't hate his NWA stuff where it just his kind of headlock style fits better. He can't do this kind of wrestling. Like later when he becomes IRS, then he has a personality, but his matches are garbage.
Yeah, nobody is worse at the sports entertainment style of wrestling than Mike Rotunda ever. Like he just doesn't get it. For some reason,
he's called Mike Rotundo.
Can't have Rotunda, pal.
Yeah, I don't get that. I don't know if that's a mistake by the commentary team or if they deliberately changed his name for some reason.
I just love the idea that like the WWF office could make a typo and then you just have to go as that for
Yes.
years.
They're not going to admit their mistake.
And like, they're not a good tag team. They're really not.
It's just two guys, and they're all American boys, and they come out to they were either coming out to Real American or Born in the USA at this point. They use Real American at some point in their run, but I don't remember exactly when it starts.
That's a good theme you got there, brother.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's very funny that this tag team will wind up basically causing the existence of Bray Wyatt and Bo Dallas. But that's pretty much all you can say about it.
Yeah.
Because then they like marry each other's sisters or something.
That's what I'm trying to remember exactly what the relationship is here.
Because I know
it must be one of those.
Because I know that Bo and Bray are Rotunda's kids with Barry Windham's sister. So that's
Bray's name is literally Wyndham Rotunda, isn't it?
Yeah, or maybe it wasn't with the sister. Maybe they were just like best friends or something, and he named him Wyndham Rotunda. But yeah, it's such a weird thing.
No, Bray is Blackjack Mulligan's grandson.
Oh.
So yeah, I think he is. I think he did marry Barry's sister.
Fucking hell.
One of those. I don't know what this is in the wrestling business where your coworkers are allowed to date your sister.
And to say, hey, this person I trust less than anybody in the world who I've seen fuck rats for the past 2 years. Hey, meet my sister.
The entire Hart family is built on this.
Yes.
It's like, come on, Brett. I mean, Brett hates all his siblings, so you understand how it happened.
Come on down to the dungeon and find your wife. She'll be in the attic.
Oh my god! So this match, it's whatever. It's a 5-minute match. I love the Sheik and Volkov because just let's throw the foreign baddies together, even though the Soviet Union and Iran were not friendly with each other at all.
They're just kind of general bad guys, I guess.
Yeah, they're both anti-American. Iran #1, Russia #1, USA.
Oh man, like you would think. You know what? I'm not even gonna say like Iron Sheik held the WWF title briefly because they desperately needed somebody to. But beyond that, he kind of didn't have a great career.
He really kind of did. Well, after he gets fired, when does the incident with Duggan? That's not the thing with Duggan's not till 87. So I guess it is a couple of years after this where he's not really doing anything. And then for some reason they bring him back in WCW in the early 90s, and he was completely done by then.
Sheik is one of those guys who must be beloved in the locker room because he just keeps getting jobs.
Of course, how can you not love the Iron Sheik?
Yeah, but like he just keeps getting jobs years and years and years after he had any value left.
Unless you're that no good motherfucker, Brian Blair.
That no good motherfucker.
So the Sheik hits Rotunda with Freddie Blassie's cane, and Volkov gets the pin. We've got our first title change in WrestleMania history. Sets up a chase for the house show very well.
Yeah. I mean, this match, it doesn't suck.
Yeah, it was in the top half of this card.
Yeah. I mean, before Volkov literally, like, his legs fell off of his body and crawled away, he wasn't that bad for a big guy.
Yeah, and I enjoy the Sheik just for his raw power and the heel persona.
For sure. I mean, Rotunda and Wyndham don't really have any charisma together at all as a team, but like it's still not that bad a match.
Yeah. The Express continue on for a little bit. They get the belts back in June, then lose them to the so-called dream team of Brutus Beefcake and Greg Valentine in August, and that's the end of their run. Wyndham goes back to Florida, and Rotunda goes back to Crockett.
This is sort of a random question, but I'm driven by a need to ask this right now. Why was every tag team in the 80s the Express?
I don't really know where it started. Well, I think the Midnight Express got the name first. They were named after, is it a song or a movie?
I Well, Midnight Run is a movie. Is Midnight Express a movie?
I mean, Midnight Express is a movie. There's also something to the Rockers were the Midnight Rockers. They ripped it off from the Rock and Roll Express. I don't know where it started. It's a cool sounding name.
Yeah, but then there's like the Orient Express and the U.S. Express.
No, the Orient Express was less cool.
It was significantly less cool, yes. The Lex Express,
I can't wait till we get to cover the Lex Luger failed babyface run.
I can't wait till we get to talk about Lex Luger's entire career. We should just do a whole episode on Lex Luger, who sucks.
He was not so bad before the motorcycle accident.
Yeah.
Like he had some good matches with Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat, which is pretty faint praise, I guess.
Well, I also think that he hit the gas way too hard in WWF, and that set him back too. But he is part of my favorite angle in wrestling history. So we're definitely Tatanka. We are covering that show at some point.
So next we've got the $15,000 body slam challenge. It's Big John Studd against Andre the Giant. It's if Andre wins, he gets $15,000 of Studd's money. If Studd wins, Andre has to retire. Not really fair stipulations.
Now, the funny thing about the fact that Andre and Studd had to work together so much is Big John Studd may be the only person in wrestling history that Andre the Giant hated. He hated him.
I thought Andre hated every big man was kind of how it worked out.
Yeah, but I think he especially hated Studd because I think they were trying to replace him with Studd.
Yes. And Andre's like, oh, not so big when I finish. Oh.
And I think he pretty much kills Big John Studd's push over time, where he's just like, nah, I'm not doing the job to him, brother. Sorry.
He ran his ass out of the company. He's gone after this until like 89.
Which is crazy when you consider how much he got pushed over the course of his WWF tenure. But like, Andre's not having it.
No, yeah. I mean, if the boss didn't like you, you weren't sticking around. Freebirds found that out. He kicked their asses out of the company after about a week.
That's one of my favorite stories.
Just like threw their shit out of the locker room, was like, you don't work here anymore.
And then they call the office like, are we fired? And Vince is like, well, I guess.
I think he did the same thing to the Rockers.
Yep.
So Studd cut off Andre's beautiful afro to get the heat on this one.
No, he honestly looks better.
He looks way better. Like most people who lose a hair versus hair match, they come out looking better.
I can't wait until I lose my hair versus hair match so I can find out what short hair is like.
Andre's fucking squashes Studd here. He's not selling shit for him.
Yeah, it's funny. You always think about Andre being like this guy who never takes a single bump. That's not who Andre really was. If Andre wanted to bump for you, Andre could bump for you. Even at this point when he's kind of getting older and his body's kind of failing him, he still is.
I feel like bumping Andre only came out when he was doing like his running the territory circuit. I feel like in New York it was always, can't be knocked off his feet.
Well, maybe not bumping. Selling is probably the better way to put it. But he would rock for your punches. He would kind of go with it. He would hit the ropes and tie himself up, do his Andre spots.
I always love the tie in the ropes because it never happens to anyone else, but it happens to Andre in every single match.
Because he's just so big, man. The ropes attack him.
Yeah, and the ropes are so loose back then, you could actually do that and not have it cut off circulation.
But yeah, here's all you need to know about whether Andre likes the person he's wrestling. Does he move his head when they punch him? If he does, then he likes them and wants to sell. If he does not, he is no selling the shit out of this person.
Yeah. Andre wins with the body slam in 6 minutes. Boring match. Crowd popped for the finish. Andre gets the money from the bag and starts throwing it into the crowd. I've heard a funny story here that, they got some petty cash, got some hundreds to put on the top, and then it's all singles after that. So they're telling him okay, Take it slow when you're throwing the money. We don't want people to see it's all ones. Andre grabs a handful, throws it out, just throws it into the crowd, and this is why Heenan swipes the bag and runs away with it.
I just love the idea that Andre's just like, I'm throwing all this shit into the crowd. So like literally somebody in the front row just got like a stack of money.
Yeah, $15,000. That's nothing to Andre.
Yeah, just like whatever. And then Heenan's like, no!
Oh, that's why they call him the Brain. Mean Gene interviews Wendy Richter and Cyndi Lauper backstage. Pretty good promo from Lauper, I thought.
Absolutely, she was great. Thank goodness she's there because Wendy Richter can't talk to save her goddamn life.
Yeah.
She's just kind of like a figurehead here. Like she's not important in and of herself.
Yeah. And then the fabulous Moolah with the WWF Ladies Champion, Leilani Kai, who is also pretty much a figurehead here.
Yeah. Which is that is funny to me that like the basic story here is that Moolah has found like her champion, but it also kind of mirrors the real life situation where every women's wrestler who came up was owned by the fabulous Moolah. Like it's
literally owned and pimped out.
Yeah, that whole thing. I think Leilani Kai was one of them.
Disturbing stories about the Moolah troupe.
There sure are.
So, fun trivia note. Did you know Leilani Kai wrestles Alundra Blaze at WrestleMania 10?
No shit, really?
Yeah. One of the longer gaps between WrestleMania matches. I'm trying to think who has the longest one. It's probably Bret Hart.
Oh, it's got to be Bret, yeah.
Maybe Goldberg. They had about the same gap.
Yeah, about 10 years.
Yeah, a little more, but yeah, very random that of all the people they could have had, Alundra Blaze wrestle at WrestleMania 10, they dusted her off.
Well, eventually we'll get to talk a little bit more about Alundra Blaze as we do those kind of mid-90s WrestleManias. But God, they were just looking for anybody who could wrestle her at that point.
Just get Bull Nakano.
But women's wrestling in America didn't exist in the 90s. Like it
dies. It dies in the late 80s.
It just isn't a thing anymore at all.
Vince kills it. I mean, it's interesting because it's not that he kills it off because like the Jumping Bomb Angels are still showing up kind of throughout the 80s, but yeah, it does peter out. This is by far the peak, is this 84, 85, where you have a couple big matches.
Meanwhile, in Japan, women's wrestling is the fucking shit. It is the greatest thing that has ever happened ever.
To the point where at some point the only women's wrestlers in America are Japanese talent that they're importing.
Absolutely. And God, that reminds me that Aja Kong competed at a WWF Survivor Series. What we almost had, people.
It's always so weird when there's a women's match on one of these shows because it never feels like there's any story to it. It's just they're throwing it out there.
And I mean, I guess I understand. Like, I don't really hold it against them like I would later. Because in order to create women's wrestling as a thing, you have to create like a division, like a whole separate group of people that are like as many as the men or at least close to it. And you have to create the concept of women's wrestling in your audience's mind to do anything more than just like a one-off. And that's why it never really happened until now.
Yeah, so sadly, Girls Just Want to Have Fun is dubbed over on the network. But
that's a shame.
The pop for Lauper and Richter is enormous.
And Cyndi Lauper is fucking loving it.
Yeah. I mean, this clip of them jogging to the ring didn't that make it into the history of the WWF video package?
Yeah, I think it did. Like, it's a massive, massive moment.
I love the way they shoot the entrances here at the Garden, where they show them coming through the hallway to the tunnel.
We've talked about this before when we did Survivor Series 97.
Yeah.
I love it when they show that. Yeah. It's just it's such an intimate moment where like the wrestler is going out for a huge match before you get to see him with the crowd, and it's just like it's tense and they're anxious and there's like so much anticipation built up. It's amazing to watch them in that moment. Yeah, I do not understand
how this didn't become a staple.
I have no idea. Maybe just for big matches.
Yeah, because this is how you shoot entrances in boxing, in mixed martial arts, in combat sports. This is just kind of the standard that we do the tracking shot as they walk to the ring.
But like the fact that we've never done this with like John Cena is madness. Like it could add so much more to that. It adds so much personality to the wrestlers involved because you're just kind of seeing them in that special pre-fight moment where they're in the zone. Like it's great.
And they're not scripted. They're just going to do whatever they do.
You're seeing who they are in that moment.
About them. And
right.
Like we talked about in Montreal, the contrast between Sean is, kind of nervously making jokes with DX versus Brett is just straight beeline into the ring.
With his kid trailing behind him, holding the flag.
Keep up, kid.
Blade Hart.
I think that's his name.
I cannot believe Blade Hart never got in the business because what the perfect name.
Yeah. Well, they would have made him change it.
Sword Heart.
So there's not a lot to this match. Richter wins. Kind of Richter hits like a burning hammer at one point. Is the one interesting thing.
That's very odd.
Yeah. Just comes out of nowhere and is not the finish to the match. She wins kind of sloppily rolling through a crossbody.
Yeah, she doesn't quite do the burning hammer because she doesn't land her on her neck, but like she kind of like
really for the best that she didn't try that.
Why would you trust her to do that move? It's such a like high margin of error move. Just do it the right way up.
Yeah. So as a fun bit of trivia and historical fact, Richter later this year would fall victim to the original screw job. She had some financial disputes with Vince. He tried to get her to sign a new contract right before a match, and she said, no, I need to read it. So she goes out to wrestle the Spider Lady, who is just supposed to be a jobber. But the Spider Lady is actually Moolah under a mask, which is both the storyline and the reality, that Moolah rolls her up and the referee quick counts her to get the belt off her.
And that's one of the great things about the Montreal Screwjob, is that everybody involved knew that Vince had done this before.
Yeah, and yet Brett just trusted him. Brett trusted Earl.
Yep. Earl wasn't the ref who counted it for Spider Lady, was he?
No, he wasn't. Earl doesn't come in until they do the angle for the main event in '88 before WrestleMania 4.
That's a shame because that would have been perfect.
Yeah. Amazing that it turned out. I mean, you can only do this if you have identical twins, and it just turned out they had a pair.
Yeah. Oh, you mean you need two referee twins? Yeah, they're over there, Dave and Earl.
The most brilliant angle I've ever seen.
Yes.
It's just untoppable.
Just genius. Like you couldn't ask for anything more perfect than that one, but we'll do that one later.
Yeah, we'll get there in a few weeks. Howard Finkel introduces celebrities for the main event. Former and future New York Yankees manager Billy Martin is the ring announcer. He was also apparently real feisty and wanted to fight everybody. Just a New York thing, I guess.
My favorite thing is celebrities who come in not smartened up and are just like, I want to get in there and fight. I want to wrestle Hulk Hogan. Let's go. Like, hey, hold on. Slow down, buddy.
Liberace is the timekeeper.
That's who should have wrestled Hulk Hogan.
Muhammad Ali is the outside referee. He had been promoted as being the inside, the real referee for the match. But, when they got with him and talked with him that day, it kind of became clear he wasn't going to be up to doing that. So they do a switcheroo. Pat Patterson is instead the referee in the ring, and Ali is on the floor.
This is kind of a recurring problem for Ali during this period, is that he gets offered a couple of referee gigs and like smaller things. Cause like kind of what do you do with somebody like Muhammad Ali? It's the same problem we talked about last week when we talked about Mike Tyson, where like, what do you do with him? Like he's not a wrestler and he can't really get physical, but you want to have him involved. And in wrestling, it's kind of hard to find that spot. It's like the same kind of problem they had with like Sable. Like when you have somebody super over, but they can't wrestle, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he wasn't. Yeah, they didn't really. I'm trying to think, was he involved in the promotion? A very little. I think I've seen a clip of Mean Gene interviewing him, but it was just a quick kind of 1 minute thing. He was really already in decline in terms of his kind of verbal and motor skills at this point.
I do want to point out, because I literally just learned this like while we've been doing the podcast, that this is not the only time that he was offered a special guest refereeing spot. He was once offered $1 million to special referee a match between Antonio Inoki and Idi Amin, the super evil dictator from Africa.
Yeah.
Yes. They were going to have it? Unfortunately, Idi Amin got exiled from the country before the match could take place.
Fortunately.
Yes. But that was a real thing that was going to happen.
That's a good catch. I think he also referees a Hogan match in WCW in the 90s.
Probably.
Like, I think it's him and Flair, and like Mr. T is in Hogan. Like, they basically tried to redo WrestleMania 1 in 1994.
Sad.
Yeah. Hogan and Mr. T came out to Eye of the Tiger here, but they dub in Real American on the WWE Network and the DVD releases.
Probably for the best.
Yeah, no reason to pay the music rights for that one. I mean, I'm always entertained. There's all sorts of weird music issues on WWE Network. I love Jericho on WCW shows coming out to his WWF theme because it just seems so off.
Yeah. That's my biggest problem with WWE Network is the music, and it's not their fault. I understand that. It's just
the royalty issue. The royalty issues are weird,
but it just sucks. Like it's
because you can't. The crowd is wrong, and like they've re-recorded the intro in a lot of cases.
And there's nothing sadder than when you can tell that Howard Finkel had to sit in a studio 20 years later and re-record his entrance.
Yes. And they've suddenly lost the rights to Rick Rude's theme. I don't know when that happened, but like I swear on the network they used to have his actual theme, and now they've got a dubbed version.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess at some point the license just expires and it's not worth re-upping. So Hogan and Mr. T have Jimmy Snuka in their corner. Cowboy Bob Orton is, of course, Roddy Piper's bodyguard. Paul Orndorff is Hogan's former friend who turned on him, and he would subsequently become his friend again and then turn on him again the year after this. And they would have probably the hottest house show run of the 1980s, which is a very strange historical fact.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think the average wrestling fan remembers about Paul Orndorff?
That he was in this match?
Yeah,
that
maybe that he beat up.
Maybe that his arm gets weird and shrunken in the 90s.
Yeah, that's such a weird story too.
Yeah, a side effect of nerve damage that he worked through because he just couldn't turn down the money he was making with Hogan.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, if you have nerve damage, please don't exacerbate that nerve damage. It can seriously fuck you up.
But he made so much money.
So much money.
I'd love to hear. I've never heard the numbers, but I'd love to hear what he was making a week at that point.
I mean, we're talking about money like no one in the wrestling business had ever made to that point. And if you're him, you don't know that you're ever going to get a payday like that again.
No, well, it turned out. I think it's clear you're not, because when are you ever going to have another program like that?
Right.
The Piper and T get in the ring. Piper slaps T. T returns the slap, and then Piper takes T down and just won't give him a fucking thing.
Buries him.
Yeah. Like Vince asked Piper to, let T, throw him around a little bit, and he's just like, I won't do it. I won't take a bump for that man.
We talked during the Starrcade 97 thing about how Hogan basically destroyed WCW just because he was being a petulant asshole and refused to sell for Sting or put him over. We remember Roddy Piper so fondly, but he was maybe the most petulant dickhead about doing jobs or selling of anyone who ever lived.
He was also a huge racist.
Yes.
We'll get to WrestleMania 6 and Bad News Brown eventually.
Roddy Piper is not good people, but he's so entertaining that we forgive him.
Yeah. So I mean, Piper just hates Mr. T. Orndorff didn't like him either. Like I think it's just one of those natural things that the celebrity who comes in and is getting paid a ton of money is going to rub people the wrong way. But I think T probably exacerbated the situation. It sounded like he was kind of flaky and showed up really late and didn't have the best attitude.
Yeah, and he definitely thought that he was like a real wrestler too. He was just like, "Oh, I'm gonna put on the tights and I'm gonna be better than any of you at this." Like, settle down.
Yeah, there's everybody starts fighting and Ali jumps into the ring. This is not supposed to happen, and Pat Patterson like has to, just beg and cajole him to get back out of the ring and onto the floor.
I would love to know what Ali would have done because if he knocks out Roddy Piper, how amazing is that?
Oh God.
Because even though that's not the plan, honestly, I kind of feel like that's the kind of thing they would show in WrestleMania video packages for the rest of time.
If Ali dropped Piper, and honestly, I would have cheered because Piper kind of deserved to get knocked out.
And how do you not book that? Like, Piper's not going to sell from Mr. T, but racist or no, you would imagine he'd take a punch from fucking Muhammad Ali.
Probably. Also, it's a perfect job for Bob Orton.
Yes.
Bob Orton gets knocked out by Mr. T on a Saturday night's main event the year after this. Like,
Yeah,
that guy would do anything for some money.
That's the whole reason he was there, was to take all the bumps for Piper.
Somebody had to do jobs.
I know, right?
Piper and Orndorff start to walk out, but Hogan stops Patterson from counting them out, and then Piper and Orndorff just decide, okay, we'll keep doing the match then.
I love the power of all the Hulkamaniacs gives Hulk Hogan the power to change the rules in a match. Just like, no, don't count them out. And Pat Patterson's like, yeah, all right.
Creative control, brother.
Yeah, whatever you want, man. I don't give a shit.
T manages to hip toss Orndorff. He also gets Piper with an airplane spin. That was the most Piper would allow T to do.
Let the record show that Mr. T is probably, I don't know, like a top 5 celebrity wrestler of all time, and he sucks. But at least he's doing moves competently.
Yeah. Big boot from Hogan sends Piper over the top of the floor. Hogan gets double teamed by Piper and Orndorff. They hit him with a double atomic drop. Ali gets back in the ring again. And that takes a long time for this has kind of been forgotten by history, but God, he's jumping in. He's not really all there.
See, it's a bit of a mystery to me what's happening here, because Ali is not a stupid man. I don't think he thinks wrestling is real.
Probably not, although his one experience with wrestling turned out to be really real.
Yeah, where he thought it was fake, and then Antonio Inoki kicked him in the calf 55 times in a row.
Yeah. He also, I think he got airplane spun by Gorilla Monsoon one time too.
Right. But so is he just trying to have like a moment, or is he just like super confused? Like, obviously the medical issues were starting to settle in right around this time,
I
but
think it might be a little of both.
It's just a shame because, God, if they had done this like 3 years earlier with Ali could have done something.
Yeah, I recently read Patterson's book, and he talked about this and just said, like, he was not supposed to be getting in the ring. Like, we did not want him to be getting involved, but he kept jumping in.
God knows what he could have done.
Oh, my God, because he could still throw a punch.
I'd say even past his prime, Ali could probably beat the shit out of everyone in that ring.
Oh, for sure. Piper's fake gold gloves experience is not going to do it for him.
Yeah, especially when he's not expecting Ali to be coming, he just turns into a jab.
Hogan or Orndorff misses a knee drop off the top rope. Hogan makes a hot tag to T. Piper isn't going to give T shit, so they cut him off right away.
Literally, it's so telegraphed as the hot tag. Mr. T jumps in the ring and gets his ass beat.
Yeah, probably for real. But that's the joy of this match, is how kind of real and out of control it feels.
Yeah, there's a sense of chaos to the whole thing. And like, I started, as the match went on, watching Pat Patterson more and more because he looks so put upon the entire time.
Like, he's very deliberately laid out everything that's supposed to happen in this match, and none of it is going according to plan.
Yeah, so he's just like, God damn it, Piper, sell for tea. Ali, what the fuck are you doing up on the apron? God damn it, where's Orton? Hulk, get back in here.
Yeah. Oh my god. T manages to make the tag to Hogan. He also gets cut off with a back suplex.
This is the worst tag match of all time in terms of the traditional tag style.
Orton gets in the ring, but Snuka takes him out. Orton goes to the top. He goes to hit Hogan with his cast. He misses and knocks out Orndorff, and that's enough for Hogan and T to get the pin. I thought this was a lot of fun. Like, this was by far the best match on this card.
Yeah, it's so funny that like overbooking would become kind of a term that we would use way more in like the late 90s to talk about like, but it's all right here. Like, it's just like, this match is going to suck. We can't have a clean finish, so we got to do Gaga, and they do all the Gaga.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, but this is, I think, what people wanted to see was the chaos of pro wrestling.
Absolutely. And like some guys in wrestling thrive on it when it's like this, and that's Piper. This is Piper's element.
Yes. Piper's got to punch somebody out after this, so he knocks out Pat Patterson.
Poor Pat. God damn it.
We go to the back. Mean Gene interviews Hogan, Snuka, and Mr. T. Hogan promises the three of us are going to be around for a long time, brother. He was only right about one of them, but he was really right about that.
Somehow Snuka would be around the longest because he'll still be wrestling matches for them 20 years later.
That's right. Snuka was at that WrestleMania 25, but Hogan wasn't.
Oh, man.
We go back to Gorilla and Jesse to wrap things up, and the first WrestleMania is in the books. You know, not something that stands out from an artistic perspective, but a tremendous business success.
Absolutely. Like, and in some ways, it kind of just feels like an extended like TV show.
It's really a Madison Square Garden house show that, you know, happens to have Mr. T and Cyndi Lauper.
Right. Until the main event, which kind of feels like a different thing. And that's the main event kind of feels like later WrestleManias will feel. They'll kind of like get the sense of, okay, this is the spectacle we need to produce. And that's where they'll kind of get the idea to go forward. But the rest of it feels like a house show and not a particularly good one.
No.
They're building up to other storylines.
They're just, they're just telling guys, you know, go out there, work your match, you know, take it home quick.
And that's just how things were back then. You can't really blame them for that. They didn't realize that there were going to be 40 other WrestleManias, and we look back and be like, well, this one was the shits. Like, that wasn't the point.
And nobody bought this show to see Ricky Steamboat wrestle Matt Bourne or David Sammartino. They bought this show to see Mr. T.
Yeah, like, this was... Now, you would have thought, and again, wrestling didn't necessarily work this way back then, but like if you thought that you were going to have the most exposure with this show that you'd ever had, wouldn't you kind of try to build stars on it?
Well, they built Hogan is the big thing, is they transfer T's pop. T draws people in, and then they see this Hulk Hogan, and he's so big and so charismatic and so cool.
Right.
And it's the same thing they successfully do with Mike Tyson and Steve Austin at WrestleMania 14. And it's what they failed to do with Lawrence Taylor at WrestleMania 11 and Mayweather at WrestleMania 24. Nothing really came from that. Trump at 23, Lashley's run doesn't end up going anywhere due to other issues. But this is a formula they go back to, you know, every couple WrestleManias, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, but the template is built right here.
Yeah.
And
so whenever people complain about celebrities in WrestleMania or celebrities in wrestling, you know, it's literally as old as the show.
Yeah. And when it does work, literally nothing works better. So you can absolutely see why they go back to it again and again.
Yeah, both Hulk Hogan and Steve Austin are made as national stars by celebrity involvement.
Yeah, so when Michael Strahan shows up to shake John Cena's hand, don't fucking lose your mind. Like, that's just a thing.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's the books for WrestleMania 1, and next week we're going on to the maybe a little bit better sequel, WrestleMania 2.
WrestleMania 2, I have often said, is one of the stupidest, most absolutely ridiculously, like, the hubris of attempting to run the show that they tried to run with WrestleMania 2 is outrageous. And if I had bought it, I would have fucking thrown a riot in my living room.
There's a reason they never went back to this 3 arenas gimmick.
It is so stupid. And yet, it's awesome.
Shocking that they pulled it off as well as they did.
Absolutely.
The fact that they didn't have major technical problems. I forgot to mention, there was only one technical problem with this show, a big one. In Pittsburgh, the feed went down, like the satellite or whatever went down. So as a make good, they showed WrestleMania on broadcast TV in Pittsburgh the next weekend.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, going into this, I think there was definitely unclear whether they could pull off something of this technical size, and they did. And then with WrestleMania 2, they managed to pull the 3 locations off, at least in terms of the feed never goes out, which is what they were worried about.
And they should have been worried about it, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, they stretch themselves way too thin, spend way too much money on it, and they overexpand and kind of blow what would have been an opportunity to turn a bigger profit than they did. But we'll get to all that next week as we continue on the march to WrestleMania. So thanks for listening, and come back next week if you want to hear us shit on WrestleMania 2.
And we're going to take a big ol' hearty dump.